Have you ever thought about how something as simple as buying a rope could end up being the key piece of evidence in a murder trial? Well, today, we're going to dive into exactly that. We're exploring the legal idea of conduct, the specific things people do both before and after a crime that lawyers use to piece together a story for the courtroom. I mean, you've seen it a million times in movies, right? The suspect runs, and everyone, including us, immediately thinks guilty. But what is it really about that one single act of running away that makes it such powerful evidence in a real court of law? The answer to that question actually tells us a whole lot about how the legal system looks at human behavior. Okay, so before we can really get into how an action becomes evidence, we got to take a step back and look at what a crime even is. Legally speaking, it's not just one thing. It's actually a combination of two really distinct and totally essential elements.
See, every single crime needs two things to exist. First, you've got the mens rea. That's just Latin for the guilty mind. It's the intention, the thought of committing the crime. But look, just thinking about it isn't illegal. You also need the second piece, the actus reus, or the guilty act. That's the physical action itself. It's when that thought and that action come together that you've got the foundation of a crime.
Okay, but think about it. How can you really prove what was going on inside someone's head? That whole mens rea thing. It's tricky, right? And that's exactly where conduct becomes so important. Conduct is all the observable stuff, the behavior that builds a bridge between that internal thought and the external act. It's kind of like the trail of breadcrumbs they leave behind for everyone to see. All right, let's make this real. We're going to follow a story, a dispute between a landlord and a tenant that unfortunately takes a really dark turn. And as we go, we're going to see how each and every action starts to build the case, piece by piece. So the story kicks off with a really clear motive. A tenant gets evicted, and he's furious. He vows revenge. Then we see the next step, preparation. He goes out and buys a knife and a rope. Pretty soon, his conduct starts to speak for itself. He's actually telling his friends he plans to kill the landlord. But at the very same time, the victim, the landlord, his conduct is creating a record too. He's telling people he's scared. And all of this is happening before any crime has even been committed. So all of this stuff, legally, that's what we call previous conduct. And notice something really important here. It's not just about what the accused guy did. The victim's actions, the fears he expressed, maybe filing a complaint, all of that helps paint a much fuller picture for the court before the main event ever happens. Okay, so now the crime has happened. The landlord is dead. But for the people trying to solve this, the story is nowhere near over. In fact, what our tenant does next is just as important in the eyes of the law. This is what the law calls subsequent conduct, actions taken right after the crime. And this behavior is seen as a huge window into their state of mind at that critical moment. What were they thinking? Did they seem sorry? Did they try to cover their tracks? Or, well, did they run? There's this really famous case that shows this perfectly. Imagine this. Witnesses rush over to a woman who's just been attacked. She's dying. They ask her, "Who did this to you?" With her last breath, she manages to get out just one word, Modi. That single word was her final act, her subsequent conduct. And what does the accused, a guy named Motiram, do the second he hears his name spoken? You guessed it. He runs. In that one single moment, you have two incredibly powerful pieces of subsequent conduct. The victim naming her attacker, and the accused fleeing in a way that just screams guilty conscience. You see this pattern of fleeing pop up over and over again in legal cases. Why? Because it's seen as this classic sign of what's called consciousness of guilt. It's a really powerful indicator, for sure. But not all conduct is created equal. So how do courts figure out what actually matters? So we've got these two buckets, right? Conduct before the crime and conduct after. But let's be real. Not every little thing a person does can be important. So how do courts sort through all that to separate the crucial evidence from just random noise? So let's bring our landlord-tenant story all the way back around. For the tenant, his previous conduct was buying the weapon and telling people his plan. His subsequent conduct was running away or maybe even bragging that he got his revenge. For the landlord, the previous conduct was telling people he was afraid. The subsequent conduct could have been him naming his attacker. You see, together, these actions build a whole story. And here is the absolute key, the most important rule of all.
For any of this conduct to be allowed in court, it has to be directly linked to the facts of the case. The fact that our tenant stopped for a soda on his way to the crime scene, I mean, yeah, that's technically conduct, but it's not relevant conduct. It doesn't tell us anything about the crime itself.
But wait a second. This brings up a pretty interesting question. What about just words? Things people say. Are words the same as actions? Well, generally the law says no. A statement, all by itself, usually isn't considered conduct.
But, and this is a huge but, there's a major exception. A statement suddenly becomes relevant conduct when it directly goes along with and explains a physical action. When words actually cause an action, they become a really big deal.
Picture this. A suspect is just standing on a street corner. A random person shouts, "Hey, the cops are coming," and the suspect just takes off, starts running. See, the shout itself isn't the conduct, but because it directly explains the action of running, it becomes this vital piece of evidence that ties everything together. So, let's wrap this all up. What's the big takeaway here? Well, conduct is incredibly powerful. It's the circumstantial evidence that builds a story for the jury. It can help show motive, intent, and even guilt. And it takes into account what everyone involved did. But it's also very specific. Only the behavior that's truly connected to the case is going to make the cut in court. It really leaves you with this final thought, doesn't it? We have this old saying, actions speak louder than words. But in the eyes of the law, that line can get really, really blurry. So when we're judging someone's guilt based on what they did, how sure can we ever be that we're reading those actions right?